President Thomas, good to see you. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, David. How you doing?
I'm good. It's like 60 degrees and sunny in DC. So compared to the ice storms we've been getting for the last couple of weeks, I'm a happy camper.
Same here in Atlanta. It's 73.
That's great. So first of all, I just want to say how much I appreciate you making time. I know you're a busy man. For those of you who are joining us, I had the pleasure of meeting President Thomas about a decade ago. And since then, he and I have become friends. I consider him a mentor. And now we actually have a chance to work together in a more formal way. So I couldn't think of a better person to kick off this new series with than President Thomas, because he's dedicated his life and his career, his research, his scholarship to these issues of access, equity, and opportunity. So with that, let's start at the beginning, because I always feel like it's good to ground a conversation and where people come from. So tell me a little bit about, I know you grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, but tell me a little bit about, your childhood, your family, your parents, kind of, what the inspiration was for you as a kid.
Well, just to give it some context, I was born in 1956. That's roughly 9 years after Jackie Robinson integrated baseball. It was the year in which the Montgomery bus boycott ended. It was a point in time where someone who has done all the things that I've done and the places I've been literally hadn't been created yet. The first Black student who graduated from Georgetown, where I was dean, graduated in, I think, 1954.
Wow.
There were no Black faculty at the Harvard Business School ever in the history of the college, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I was born into a time of huge transformation for our country. And my inspiration came from two places. One, the great luck of my life is that I won the parent lottery.
Mm-hmm.
I had two great parents, neither one of whom finished high school. My mother worked in a sweatshop as a seamstress, and my father always worked two jobs. One at a factory somewhere, and the other was as a janitor at night. And they had four sons. And
Where are you in the order, David?
I was number two.
Number two, okay.
And they just set high expectations for us, and told me what some days in my life I came to think was a big fib, which was I could do anything. Right. And
Yeah. You've proven them right.
And the other inspiration was the civil rights movement. And being born in 1956, I was not old enough to actually, I wasn't one of those teenagers or college students sitting at lunch counters and those sorts of things, but I was watching it.
Right.
And I was inspired by it. And even, the way that I came to pick where I was going to go to college, which I didn't do, where I didn't wind up though, which is Morehouse, and the profession I was going to, follow, was because I was reading everything I could about the civil rights movement. So I read about Martin Luther King. I was probably 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
Said he had gone to a college called Morehouse. So I decided I'm going to Morehouse.
Going there.
And when I looked at who was, shaping the civil rights movement, I saw two groups of people with college degrees, preachers and lawyers.
Right.
So I decided I would be a lawyer. And, my parents said, great, you got to work hard.
Yeah.
But, that's not a stretch for you. And the reason I wanted to be a lawyer was, at that time, I thought lawyers changed the world.
Yeah.
and the civil rights movement was about changing the world to make a better world for me, and young people like me. And I grew up in a very segregated Kansas City, Missouri at the time. Like literally, the grade school I went to had one white family, and they were the poorest family in our community, so they couldn't move out. And my high school had two white families. So very segregated. And then the world opened up when I got a scholarship to go to France. Had never been on an airplane till I stepped on one to take me to France to study my senior year in high school for a year. And then I applied to two colleges, one of which I had barely heard of. That was Yale, and I applied to Morehouse. I got into both. Morehouse didn't give me any money, and Yale gave me a full ride.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
You know, there you go.
It took you 50 years to get back to Morehouse, but you got there, right?
Years to get back, but I made it back.
Yeah.
You
know, listening to that story, I don't think I've ever told you this, but Kansas City, Missouri has a very strong place in my family and heart as well. It's where my parents met.
Oh, wow.
In 1962.
Wow.
My mother was 23, Jewish white woman. My father, a 33-year-old divorced Black man with 3 kids under the age of 6, all daughters. And it was still a felony for a Black person to marry a white person. They happened to work together at the Social Security Administration. So they took the bus over the lunch hour from Kansas City, Missouri to Kansas City, Kansas to go to the Justice of the Peace to get married. And then came back to work and never told anybody. So I ended up growing up in Wisconsin, but you know, Kansas City has always and always will have a special place in the, you know, Sutphen family. And you know, what you speak of in terms of the environment and the segregation and what it was like when you were growing up resonates. So you end up going to Yale, and then and then you graduate, and then you go to Columbia and get a master's, and then you go back to Yale, you get another master's, then you get a PhD. Tell me a little bit about the kind of intellectual awakening over that period of time, and the desire to ultimately, you obviously at some point decided, I'm not going to become a lawyer. I want to become an academic. I want to, because I know when I was in school, the thought of going and getting a PhD was just like more than I could imagine. So tell me a little bit about that, because I think it obviously laid a foundation for what you've done since.
So it was, you know, it was not a search for intellectual inspiration, quite frankly.
Okay.
It was, and you know, what I tell people about finding a career, you can find it in 2 ways. You can find a form and chase it. Like, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer.
Yep.
Or you can ask yourself, how do I want to be experienced in the world? And my journey was, you know, I wanted to be experienced in the world as making a difference, creating change.
Right.
And the more I looked at what lawyers did and what I would have to do as a lawyer, I thought, that's not what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And I discovered this area of study called organizational behavior that was all about how organizations and the people in them change and what leaders have to do to make change happen. And I was a student activist at Yale. And I was learning these theories that were helping me be a better change agent.
Right.
And then I met the first Black person to get a PhD in organizational behavior at Yale, the end of my senior year. And he was still in the program. And that created a vision for me that I could pursue this area that I loved, because it helped me understand how to change the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, once in it, I discovered that the thing I really liked the most was going out in the world, being in touch with real things that were happening, and then coming back and reflecting on them so that I could help other people make sense of it and figure out how to take action right? To
Yeah.
replicate it.
Well, that's a nice segue. One of the things I tried to do my homework in preparation for this conversation. So I actually went back and I read some of, you've obviously published a ton of scholarly work over the years, and a lot of it has been around, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how organizations can evolve. And, I think, this is a throughput that I want to keep throughout the conversation. And I was struck, one of the articles that you wrote, the title of it was Beating the Odds, Leadership Lessons from Senior African-American Women. And there's a section in the article, and I'm going to read it to you because I'm sure it's been a long time. You probably don't remember everything that you've written over the years, but it says, the women we studied developed 3 skills that were key to their resilience: emotional intelligence, authenticity, and agility. And, picking up on what you just said about going out into the world and then bringing that back and doing the kind of rigor around it, and then being able to share those insights back to help both either individuals or organizations. Maybe talk a little bit about emotional intelligence, authenticity, and agility, and those interconnected skills and their ability to help people, whether you're a person of color or if you're trying to affect change and be a leader in an organization.
Yeah. And, just to be clear, emotional intelligence, authenticity, agility are not what's distinct about the Black women, any one of those, or right, but it's that every Black woman we studied who made it to the top of their organizations had all 3 in combination.
Gotcha.
Right, all 3 in combination. And emotional intelligence is really about 2 things: being able to connect with, understand, empathize with people and where they may be emotionally, what their unique needs are. And it's about self-regulation, right? It's about impulse control. Um, and it's about being able to, read situations well and regulate yourself so that, you don't blow yourself up, right? Which some people do.
Right.
And authenticity is really about how these women came to cope with what some of them call bicultural stress. So early in their careers, they had stories about what I call the 2 parties. It's Christmas time.
Right.
Black professional. You go, right? You have a party for your white colleagues at work, and then you have a party for your Black, for your Black friends.
Yeah.
Never the twain shall meet. Well, what these women were all able to do was to create an integration of the aspects of who they were so that they felt authentic. They didn't feel like they were going to work and wearing the mask, even though most of them had that experience early in their career. But they worked their way to a point where, even if other people were shocked to see them in the roles they were in, they never felt out of place.
Yeah.
Right. And that authenticity, which also allows for connection and vulnerability, especially when you combine it with the EQ piece, right? Because you're reading the situation well, but you're being yourself. And agility is essentially the capacity to learn from your practice and adapt, is the way I think about agility. And to evolve, right? And read and adapt to situations and bring yourself to those situations as fully as is necessary and as you can. And we found those common among all those women we studied at the top who were C-suite executives.
Right. So the reason why I wanted to ask you about that is you more recently co-authored a piece that appeared late last year, I believe it was, in the Harvard Business Review, called Getting Serious About Diversity, Enough Already About the Business Case. And in that article, you and your co-authors talked about the importance of kind of learning and effectiveness paradigms when people are thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and moving the dial. And I think that there's some alignment between these things. And I guess what I'd love to dig in on a couple minutes is, how you think about what learning and effectiveness paradigms mean, and how that can apply to what I would argue is one of the challenges that higher ed faces now, which is, how do these institutions build more truly inclusive, diverse places? And, what role does emotional intelligence, authenticity, agility, a learning and effectiveness paradigm all come together to create the kind of change and awareness of circumstance that needs to happen to kind of meet the moment?
So the way to think about it is there's the seed and there's the soil, right?
Yeah.
So, our findings that we reported about the Black women, if you will, were about what may be unique to that seed that then has to be planted in a soil. And the learning of and effectiveness paradigm is really about having a perspective around what the value of diversity is that connects it to the work of the organization and the purpose of the organization. And to do that, you have to create the conditions that make it easier for people to bring that combination of emotional intelligence, agility, and authenticity to the work. Because even today, I would say that there are companies, and they're all around us, they have no senior women, no senior Black women. It's not by accident, right? It's the soil. They're not creating the soil. Learning and effectiveness is about creating an environment that allows people to bring their diversity to improve the work and the process and the workplace. And what we've seen, in organizations where that happens is transformation of the way people think about products. An example, so one company that we worked with, they got focused on people with disabilities as one of their diversity and inclusion dimensions, and had the senior executive for product design be the champion for that group. Well, that group started to teach him about laws that were coming out of, or legislation coming out of the federal government around accessibility of products. Well, over time, as his product development team got in touch with this and they engaged, folks, they made accessibility a key criteria for the design of all products.
Right.
As opposed to you make it without thinking about accessibility and then you figure out how to rejigger it.
Bolt it on at the end.
Bolt it on. Well, the result was that, they dominate the market because they build products that are consciously made accessible in the area that they work in. And that came out of conversation and engagement, right? Through the lens of the identity of ability. We've seen the same things happen around things related to race and ethnicity, but it's also about not pigeonholing people, such that, right, the only time your perspective matters is when we're talking about something that has to do with Black people.
Right. You're the subject matter expert, and that's the only time we want to hear from you.
And that's the only time we want to hear from you, as opposed to, learning from the different perspectives to make the environment better. Because what we've also seen is where people only focus on what we call access and legitimacy. We got to get access to this group of people. And to do it, we need to look legitimate. So let's get somebody with a particular hue, a particular gender, right, to represent them. Is people become cynical, right? I can say in my own career, I consulted to every, and I doubt if there were many faculty members, but I was called over by every president at Harvard during the time I was there to give them advice.
Mm-hmm.
It was always about race.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And, I didn't, on one hand, I didn't mind, but after a while I noticed.
Yeah.
Right?
So let me pivot a little bit to, so, I think we talked about, I just cycled off of a 6-year stint on the board of trustees of Amherst, which, obviously is a small liberal arts college, top ranked. So, does not reflect necessarily the broad spectrum of what higher ed is for most people. But, Amherst has actually done a really effective job of moving the dial on the representational diversity side of things. So in other words, 44% of the students are domestic students of color, 85% of the international students are on financial aid as opposed to full pay. And to your point about the seed versus the soil, like clearly, talent everywhere in the world, but when it actually came to, okay, what is the lived experience on campus once these students get here? I remember talking to one of the chemistry professors who said, I now teach a course in chemistry, and I love the fact that I have an unbelievably diverse set of students in my class that come from different lived experiences, different socioeconomic, backgrounds. But what it means is I have one student in my class, regardless of color, who came out of, Dalton, whose chem lab was as good, if not better, than the one we have at Amherst. And then I've got someone else, whether they're from, a rural, a white community or urban high school or somewhere around the world, who's never been in a chem lab before. So like when you think about this whole notion of seed and soil and learning organizations, and you think about higher ed in particular, and some of the challenges and some of what you're trying to do at Morehouse, talk a little bit about how you think leaders in higher education need to be thinking about that transformation and that mindset and process.
I think it starts with asking ourselves, okay, given this input of young talent we're bringing in the organization and their diversity, how do we redesign the way we think about the work to meet these kinds of realities you're describing? And I won't only talk about Morehouse, but an institution that has done an amazing job of developing Black and Latino students along with white students across the economic spectrum, the Daltons and the kid who went to a high school like mine, is the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Mm-hmm. And part of the way they've done it is they've redesigned the way they think about teaching and getting students to engage each other. It's a much more collective enterprise as opposed to the enterprise where each student comes in, they only act as an individual. I try to lecture, keep up with the ones who are really well prepared and bring the ones who aren't along. Mm-hmm. As opposed to thinking about ways of how do we transform the classroom? At Morehouse, we've had professors. We're very well known for producing individuals who go into medicine, and the sciences. We produce more students with who go on to get PhDs in STEM, Black male students, than any other institution. Well, we've got faculty who've developed pedagogy for teaching these science courses, such that if students don't meet, when they do the placement exam, mm-hmm. our placement exam, they're not ready to go into the traditional first year biology course. We have a biology sequence that's all experimental, meaning the kids from the start are doing experiments. It's not about teaching them the theory.
Right.
And then they work um, inductively, right, to connect the theory and the reality on the ground, the reality you're experiencing in the classroom. The next year they go into the standard biology course, they do better than the students who tested that they were ready to go in freshman year.
Yeah.
But that's about rethinking how we do the work around who our students are.
It's funny you mentioned that. Years ago, 2U partnered with the School of Information at Berkeley to launch what at the time was the first Masters in Data Science online. And, we have a lot of data architecture that sits underneath the, what we do. And so in seeing, students applying into the program, we noticed at a certain stage in the funnel, women were dropping off at disproportionately large numbers. And, fortunately, the team kind of started to dig in and they realized that it was at the point where you had to demonstrate that you had a certain level of fluency in Python. And, people often say that, if men have 75% of what something requires, they'll act like they have 100% and just power through. And some research has shown that women will. So, went to the school, said, hey, we've noticed this, and essentially developed a bridge course, right? And it resulted in a substantial uptick in the number of women who ultimately enrolled in the program. So, to your point, I think, to me, that is part of the transformation that we have to think about, everybody who touches higher ed, if we're going to deliver on this promise of making higher ed more accessible and affordable, particularly for first gen, low income students. Let me ask you one question before we get to, some of the Q&A. Even before you, or right when you took the job as president of Morehouse, you talked about, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were the first non-Morehouse man to be president of the college. Is that accurate, or?
First in 50 years.
First in 50 years. Okay.
For me was the most famous, Benjamin Elijah Mays.
Okay.
20.
Tell me a little bit about what your vision is for Morehouse Online and going forward, and how you think about, what Morehouse can stand for. And as you said, when we announced our partnership recently, now is the time for the impact of Morehouse to, reach more men around the world.
Yeah. So it actually started with the development of our strategic plan. And out of our strategic plan came a strategic theme called Morehouse Beyond Borders. And it was really focused on how do we maximize our impact and service to the world? And be relevant to opportunities and challenges that uniquely face Black men of color. And so, that got us admitting to ourselves, what, for 153 years, we've only had one model of education. Young men come to this hilltop, they spend 4 to 5 years, and then they leave and go change the world.
Right.
Well, what would it look like if Morehouse went to the world? Well, then you start to look at, asking a question, what are we uniquely good at? We're uniquely good at the development and education of men. What are some of the needs we see out in the world? Well, as you know, from the research that we did trying to develop, this offering, there are over 3 million Black men with some college credit who never got a college degree.
Yeah.
We know that having a college degree makes a material difference in someone's livelihood. There's $1 million difference in earnings.
Yeah.
Just start right there. Not to mention the ways in which, that credential can give you voice. And, we looked at it and said, if there's 3 million men out there, we don't have to lower standards. And we're going to focus on non-traditional Morehouse students, older folks, time working, right? People who are in places they couldn't get to Morehouse.
Yep.
And that's really about taking what we're uniquely good at and making ourselves more available and responsible for sharing that with the world.
Yeah, it's like sharing your soil, right?
like in their soil. Hey, yeah,
That's,
right. That's exactly right.
that's right.
Or, you know, tilling the soil beyond your gates,
That's right. That's right. No
right?
doubt. No
So
doubt.
that there's a bigger landscape where good seed can plant and grow.
Totally. So obviously we could have this conversation for a much longer period of time, but I want to pivot to just, we've gotten a couple of questions from folks who are listening in. So I'd love to spend a little bit of time. And for those of you watching, I'm looking off to the side so I can read the questions appropriately. Here's one. Many organizations doubled down on their DE&I efforts over the spring and summer of 2020 in response to the renewed fight against racism and for equity, equality, and change. In your opinion, how do you prevent DEI from becoming a bandwagon fad and instead encouraging organizations to activate on their promise to improve now and the future? And then they said they loved your product accessibility story.
Yeah, so I think it's two things that will make the difference. Upward pressure from people in the organization to say, we need to be accountable around this as an organization. And leaders willing to make themselves accountable and open to the idea that they have to learn.
Yeah.
And, I was interviewed for a Forbes article where I talked about the fact that I think most CEOs of both for-profit and nonprofit organizations are not ready to lead in this moment. And part of it is most of them don't have diversity in their own personal networks. But for leaders who really want to take this up, they can begin by addressing, am I prepared to learn to lead on this issue? And again, it's back to learning and effectiveness. Am I willing to reshape the way I do my leadership work because I'm going to be learning as we go through this journey? And having the CEO say, you know what, I'm the chief diversity officer.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Totally matters. So we got another question. This one's from Ryan. Creating more opportunity through higher education is a passion both of you share. What advice can you offer to university leaders beginning their journey to expand access and their transformative learning experiences? What should they keep in mind when creating a strategy to build economic security and social mobility for learners?
Again, I think first of all, really understanding why they haven't done it. What are the conditions that have prevented us from doing it? Also, understanding that the conditions that people experience in your organization who represent those dimensions of diversity that you're now trying to bring in, right? If their experience in your organization is poor, they feel devalued, that will get in the way of you trying to create conditions for access. So I think you have to start inside, and build an organization that's then able to engage the folks we're trying to bring in and give more opportunity and access, and the other is you have to prioritize it and disproportionately invest in it.
It's interesting for those of you who don't know President Thomas. You can imagine that you're very fortunate if he's your mentor. And I just wanted to point out, because she happens to be the next guest next month on our show, President Lynn Wooten, who's the new president of Simmons University, is actually a mentee of President Thomas's. And it's probably no accident that, Lynn is as passionate and committed to these same issues, because I know she probably has shared through the course of her journey some of the, perspectives and insights that you've shared. So I just want to say thank you before we've got one more question before we close out. How much time and effort I know you spend, and I've seen it and heard it for all the, President Thomas was a professor at Harvard Business School for 20 years, and the number of Black folks and brown folks that I know, whether they're on the faculty at Harvard or came through Harvard, who count President Thomas's insights as part of their career success is probably too many to count. So you deserve a lot of credit for that. So here's the last question, and then I want to end with a quick personal story related to you. What's one piece of advice you would offer to an institution struggling to navigate the complexities of designing an impactful DEI strategy? Where should they start? It sounds like you maybe already answered that question in the sense that you're saying you need to start from within, and you need to maybe ask yourself, if you're the leader, am I prepared to be the leader of diversity? I thought the point that you made a couple of minutes ago, and I used to make this when I was a consultant, was that if you look around at your own kitchen cabinet and you don't have any diversity in your kitchen cabinet, then that's one of the first places that you probably need to think about starting, because it's the people who have that diversity who are often the ones who are most capable of going through that learning journey that they need to start to do the difficult work.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm sensitive to time. Oh, I got one more question. And then I'll to help educate the 3 million Black men with college credit, but not a degree. Why did you decide to tackle this opportunity online versus on campus? And thank you for making such a big positive dent in the universe.
So great question. What's the reason? The reason is I only have 66 acres here. The reason is that technology is emerging. I mean, the quality of the educational experience that we can give a student today, leveraging online tools, is light years from what it was, even the first time that I met the CEO of 2U. He came to my office when I was dean at Georgetown. And we talked about what possibilities exist. The tools that exist today are so much more refined, and our ability to give students a high quality experience made me say, I can open the aperture if I leverage an online platform, rather than having the best I could do be to build dorm rooms for 250 more students. The other piece of it is most of those men who haven't completed their degrees, they're out working, they have families, they're all over the country, packing up to come to Atlanta because they missed the experience when they were 18 to 23 is impractical. And we want to attract the best and most talented among that pool. Right. This will not be an open admissions program.
Right.
We're going to have high admission standards. The rigor will be the same,
commensurate with what you've always had.
Commensurate with what we've always had. And we think we can get to the best. And if there's 3 million, I'm thinking in 10 years, if I've touched 50,000,
transformed a lot of lives.
That's for a lot of lives, and it will make Morehouse College one of the most powerful, but invisible in some ways, networks in the world.
Yeah, I was also struck during the process, when we began to talk about how to collaborate. Your view that like partnerships, when the values are aligned and the capabilities are complementary, like are the things that really enable organizations to thrive, because there's certain things you're really, really good at sometimes. And there's certain things that, maybe you could become good or great at, but relative to the, time and effort that would take. And, that's the thing that excites me, the most about our partnership is, I know there's a lot of trust, there's aligned values, and I really do believe, and I know you feel this way, and your provost and the faculty, that the 2 + 2 does equal 5, and we can transform a lot of lives together. So in the last minute or two, I just want to close with a personal story, because I think it reflects, how David thinks about the world and, his kind of gift to people. So as I said, about a decade ago is when I met President Thomas. He had just come to Georgetown to be the dean of the business school. And this was during the Obama administration. And I was fortunate enough to have kind of a cross-sectoral Black men's dinner group that used to get together on a pretty regular basis. And David happened to be one of our first guests. And, it was an impressive group of brothers from civil society and government and private industry. And, he joined us one night for dinner. And the one piece of advice you gave us that I can tell you, because we all stay in close contact and, support each other. At the end of the evening, you said something, and I think this goes to the point that you were talking about earlier about emotional intelligence and what that means when it comes to vulnerability. You said there's a lot of successful people, and in this case, we were talking particularly about Black men who are struggling with something, need something, could use help, and are too prideful to ask for it. So what I ask of all of you, if you're going to be true friends to each other throughout your careers and support each other, is at the end of all of your meetings, whether it's group meetings or individual meetings, go around the room and make sure that somebody asks everybody in the room, is there anything that I can do to help you? Because it's a lot easier when somebody asks you that question to be honest about the help that you need than it is to be the person who has to put their cards out on the table when you don't know that other people are going to do that. So I just want to say that piece of advice has not only helped me in making a difference in a bunch of my friends' lives, but I know a bunch of friends have been able to help me as a result of that. So I'm not going to ask you to answer the question on this conversation, but I would say to you, I want you to know anything I can do to be helpful to you, I will always be there to provide it.
Hey, I appreciate that, David. I just want you to know that you have one of the most generous spirits I have ever encountered, and that's why it was easy for me to join you and 2U in a partnership of purpose to continue to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, let's do it, man. Let's
All
do
right.
it. All right. I appreciate you.
Okay, man.
All right. Take it easy.
Care.
Bye.